This channel is for women who are doing fine, but feel quietly lost. The quiet ache no one sees. I want to begin with something uncomfortable. There is a kind of emptiness that doesn't look like sadness. It doesn't cry loudly. It doesn't fall apart. It doesn't ruin marriages or careers or reputations. It shows up while I'm folding laundry, while I'm answering emails, while I'm smiling at someone across the dinner table. It shows up when everything is technically okay. And that is what makes it so hard to name. If this channel speaks to you, if you have ever felt that quiet ache while your life looks perfectly stable from the outside, subscribe, not because I have answers, but because I am willing to sit in the questions with you, and that kind of honesty deserves company. I have a good life. I say that without irony, and I have built something solid. I wake up in a home that feels safe. I pay my mortgage. I keep my calendar organized. I meet deadlines. I return phone calls. I show up when people need me. I am responsible, capable, reliable. No one would look at me and think, she's unraveling, and I'm not. But some nights, usually after 9 p.m., when the house settles and the noise fades, something shifts. The dishwasher hums. The lights are dim. My phone is face down on the coffee table. And in that stillness, I feel it. Not grief, not despair, just a steady, low-volume ache. It feels like standing in a room I've lived in for years and suddenly realizing the walls are closer than they used to be. I am loved. I know I am. My children call. My friends text. My partner, if I have one, sits across from me at breakfast. There are people who care about me. But sometimes, even surrounded by care, I do not feel deeply met. There's a difference between being loved and feeling seen, a difference between being needed and being cherished. I am often needed. I am the one who remembers the appointment, the one who notices when someone's tone changes, the one who keeps the peace, the one who absorbs tension before it becomes conflict, the one who says, "It's okay, I've got it." And I do have it. That's the strange part. I am not drowning. I am just drifting. There is no dramatic crisis to point to, no obvious villain, no scandal, no collapse, which makes this ache almost embarrassing. What right do I have to feel unsettled when my life is stable? But stability and fulfillment are not the same thing. Functioning and feeling alive are not the same thing. For years, I thought what I was craving was external. More romance, more appreciation, more spontaneous gestures, more intensity, maybe a different job, maybe a different city, maybe a version of myself that felt lighter, freer, more electric. I told myself I was bored, or tired, or just in a season. But seasons usually change. This didn't. This felt deeper. It felt like hunger. Not for attention, not exactly, not for validation, not even for excitement. It felt like I was starving for something that should have been coming from inside my own chest, and that realization unsettled me more than any loneliness ever could. Because loneliness has a clear solution. Call someone, see someone, join something. But what do I do when I am surrounded by people and still feel slightly invisible? What do I do when I am praised for being strong, but secretly wish someone would notice how heavy strength can be? What do I do when I am admired for being independent, but quietly crave softness? There is a version of me that the world knows well. She is composed. She is thoughtful. She is self-sufficient. She is calm under pressure. She rarely asks for much. And then there is the version of me that only appears at night. The one who wonders when the last time was that I felt truly chosen, not for what I do, but for who I am when I am not performing competence. I have built a life around being dependable. but I am starting to question whether I have built a life where I am deeply nourished. I can organize a household. I can manage a career. I can navigate complex relationships. I can show up to Pilates at 6 a.m., drink enough water, eat clean, keep everything moving. But when was the last time I sat still long enough to ask myself what I am actually longing for? That question feels dangerous, because if I ask it honestly, I might have to admit something radical. The love I am craving may not be missing. It may be misdirected. I have poured so much of my emotional intelligence outward. I have anticipated other people's needs before they articulated them. I have adjusted, softened, stretched, and stabilized. I have given my best energy to the people I care about, but when it comes to myself, I offer efficiency. I manage myself. I do not romance myself. I soothe everyone else's anxiety. I rarely sit with my own. I celebrate other people's milestones. I rush past my own. I extend patience outward. I apply pressure inward. And then I wonder why something inside me feels underfed. The quiet ache no one sees is not about drama. It is about depletion. It is about the slow erosion that happens when I am constantly fine. Fine is a dangerous word. Fine means I am coping. Fine means nothing is visibly broken. Fine means no one needs to worry about me. But fine does not mean I am fulfilled. Fine does not mean I feel cherished by my own life. The shock, at least for me, was realizing that I have been waiting for someone else to fill a space I never learned to tend myself. I have been craving tenderness from outside while withholding it from within. And that is not a failure. It is a pattern many women like me have lived inside for decades. Women who are accomplished, women who are resilient, women who are emotionally literate and financially independent, women who are admired for holding everything together, women who are doing fine and feel quietly lost. If you recognize yourself in this, stay with me. Subscribe, not for motivation, not for transformation, not for performance, but for companionship in the middle of life, the middle of strength and softness, the middle of loving others and learning how to love myself. Because what I am beginning to understand is this: the ache is not proof that something is wrong with me. It is proof that something inside me is ready to be met. And this time, I am not waiting for someone else to do the meeting. The way I learned to love everyone but myself. I did not wake up one day and decide to neglect myself. It happened slowly, quietly, respectably. I became the kind of woman people rely on. When I was a girl, adults used words like mature and responsible to describe me. And I learned very early that being easy to manage made the room lighter. If I didn't need much, there was less stress in the air. If I handled things on my own, I was praised. If I stayed composed, I was admired. So I became composed. In school, I was the one teachers trusted with extra tasks. In my friendships, I was the mediator. In my family, I was the one who didn't make trouble. I paid attention to moods. I anticipated tension. I could feel when something was off before anyone said a word. What no one noticed was that I was not just observing. I was adjusting. I adjusted my tone to keep conversations smooth. I adjusted my expectations to avoid disappointment. I adjusted my needs so they would not inconvenience anyone. At first, it felt powerful. I was capable. I could handle things. I didn't crumble. I didn't demand. And I didn't create drama. In America, women like me are rewarded. We are called strong, independent, low maintenance, high functioning. We are given promotions because we can manage complexity without complaining. We are trusted in relationships because we are emotionally literate. We are admired because we do not fall apart publicly. I built my identity around that reliability. I worked hard. I earned my financial independence. I kept my credit strong. I understood contracts. I could negotiate salaries and organize budgets. I was proud of the life I constructed. But beneath that competence was a quieter pattern. I became so skilled at loving others in the language they understood that I stopped asking what my own language was. I learned how to make my partner feel supported. I remembered the details he mentioned casually. I adjusted schedules to accommodate shared goals. I made space for his ambitions. I softened my edges when he was stressed. If I was married, I became the emotional stabilizer. If I was divorced, I became the gracious co-parent. If I was single, I became the self-sufficient woman who didn't need much. I learned how to be what was required. What I did not learn was how to pause and ask, what do I require? Somewhere along the way, self-sacrifice disguised itself as virtue. I convinced myself that being selfless was maturity, that needing less made me easier to love, that being adaptable made me secure. But adaptability has a shadow. When I adapt too often, I slowly erase my outline. I stopped noticing when I was tired because everyone else seemed more tired. I stopped voicing preferences because they felt negotiable. And I stopped initiating conversations about my deeper fears because I didn't want to seem ungrateful for what I already had. Gratitude became another way I silenced myself. How can I complain? How can I want more? How can I admit something feels missing? So I didn't. Instead, I overfunctioned. I handled logistics. I managed emotional climate. I remembered anniversaries. I scheduled the dentist appointments. I checked in on friends who were going through hard seasons. I showed up with casseroles and calm advice. I listened without interrupting. I became very good at being indispensable. But indispensability is not the same as intimacy. There is something subtle that happens when I am always the steady one. People lean, they rest, they assume I am solid, and I am. But solidity does not mean I am not porous. It does not mean I do not absorb. Over time, I absorbed so much outward responsibility that my inward world became secondary. I did not neglect myself in dramatic ways. I exercised. I ate reasonably well. I went to annual checkups. From the outside, I was taking care of myself. But there is a difference between maintenance and devotion. Maintenance keeps a machine running. Devotion keeps a soul awake. I maintained myself. I did not romance my own interior life. When something hurt, I minimized it. When something delighted me, I downplayed it. When I felt resentment, I rationalized it. When I felt desire for something different, I told myself it was unrealistic. I prided myself on being rational, but sometimes rationality was just a way to avoid confrontation with my own longing. In relationships, I became the one who understood. I gave people grace, and I contextualized their behavior. I explained away small disappointments because I could see the bigger picture. I told myself that no one is perfect, that stability matters more than intensity. All of that is true. But there is another truth. When I consistently offer understanding outward and never ask for it in return, I create imbalance. Not because others are cruel, not because they refuse to give, but because I never trained them to see that I, too, require tenderness. I trained them to see me as steady, and steady women rarely receive rescue. We receive respect. We receive admiration. We receive reliance. But we are rarely enveloped. The hardest realization for me was not that others failed to love me well. It was that I never taught anyone how. I taught them that I was fine with less. I taught them that I would adjust. How I taught them that my threshold was high, and so they believed me. Somewhere inside, I thought that if I just kept loving others generously enough, someone would notice the gap and fill it. But love does not work that way. It is not a silent trade. No one can meet a need I refuse to acknowledge. When I look back now, I do not see weakness. I see a woman who survived by being capable, a woman who earned her place in rooms by being competent, a woman who believed that love was something secured through usefulness. That belief served me for a long time. It built a career. It built stability. It built respect. But it did not build a deep, embodied sense of being cherished. I learned to love everyone in the ways they could receive. Now I am learning something more unsettling and more honest. I must learn how to love myself in the ways I have been waiting for someone else to discover. Not because I failed, not because anyone betrayed me, but because I finally see the pattern clearly enough to interrupt it. An interruption, at this stage of my life, feels less like rebellion and more like reclamation. Craving versus loneliness. For a long time, I misdiagnosed myself. I thought what I was feeling was loneliness. That seemed logical. Loneliness is familiar. It is socially acceptable. It is something people understand. If I say I feel lonely, no one looks confused. They offer solutions. Join a group, call a friend, plan a trip, put yourself out there. So I tried. I filled my calendar, dinner reservations, weekend plans, work events, fitness classes. And I said yes to invitations even when I was tired because I assumed proximity would fix the ache. I told myself that connection was a numbers game. The more faces, the less emptiness. But something strange kept happening. I would sit at a long restaurant table, wine glasses catching the light, laughter rising around me, and feel a subtle distance inside my own chest. Not dissociation, not panic, just a thin layer of glass between me and the moment. I was physically present. I was even engaged. I could tell stories. I could ask thoughtful questions. I could read the emotional temperature of the table like I always had. And yet, when I drove home, the quiet followed me. That was when I began to question whether loneliness was the right word. Loneliness is the absence of people. What I was experiencing did not disappear when people were present. Loneliness softens when someone sits beside you and really sees you, when someone holds your hand, when someone calls unexpectedly just to hear your voice. But what I was feeling lingered even in the presence of care. It took me time to admit something uncomfortable. I was not lonely in the traditional sense. I was disconnected from myself. There is a particular kind of craving that masquerades as loneliness. It feels relational, but it is internal. It feels like I want someone to reach for me. But what I actually want is to feel anchored inside my own skin. When I confuse the two, I chase people when what I need is presence with myself. This confusion becomes especially dangerous in midlife. By this stage, I have relationships. I have history. I have social circles. Then if I am married, there is someone sharing the house. If I am divorced, there are still networks, obligations, routines. If I am single, I am likely not isolated. I am functioning in society. I have colleagues, neighbors, acquaintances. So when I feel the ache, I question my own credibility. How can I feel lonely when I am not alone? That question kept me silent for years. But craving and loneliness are not identical twins. They are distant cousins. Loneliness says, I need company. Craving says, I need intimacy. And intimacy is not guaranteed by proximity. I began to see how often I performed connection without actually inhabiting it. I listened carefully, but I did not always reveal myself. I responded thoughtfully, but I did not always risk depth. I asked questions, but I avoided exposing my own uncertainties. Not because I was deceptive, because I was practiced. I was practiced at being composed. There is a subtle self-protection in competence. If I am the steady one, I do not have to reveal confusion. If I am the listener, I do not have to admit that I also want to be held in conversation. If I am the one who gives advice, I do not have to confess that I sometimes feel unmoored. Over time, this creates an invisible barrier. People know me as reliable, intelligent, kind. But do they know the quieter layers, the doubts, the soft spots, the unspoken desires? And more importantly, do I? Craving, I am beginning to understand, is the signal that I have not fully met myself. It shows up as restlessness in relationships, as subtle disappointment, as the feeling that something is slightly out of reach. It tempts me to believe that if I just change the external circumstances, new partner, new city, new project, the ache will dissolve. But craving that originates inside cannot be resolved outside. I noticed this most clearly during periods when my life looked objectively full. Busy weeks, travel, social engagements, even romance. There were moments of genuine enjoyment, but underneath them, like a low current, was the question, why doesn't this land as deeply as I expect? I used to think something was wrong with the people around me, that maybe they were not expressive enough, not intuitive enough, not attentive enough. Now I see a more complicated truth. If I am not attuned to my own interior world, I cannot fully receive attunement from anyone else. If I do not know what kind of reassurance actually soothes me, how can I articulate it? If I have spent decades minimizing my needs, how can I suddenly expect someone else to magnify them? Craving, in this sense, becomes a mirror. It reveals the places where I have been efficient instead of intimate with myself. Loneliness would have been easier. Loneliness is solved by addition. Craving is solved by excavation. I have to sit with the discomfort long enough to ask, what exactly am I hungry for? Is it more praise? Or is it the ability to praise myself? Is it more touch? Or is it the ability to inhabit my own body without critique? Is it more attention? Or is it the practice of giving myself undivided attention without distraction? When I ask these questions honestly, the answers are rarely dramatic. They are quiet. They point toward habits of self-abandonment so subtle they almost seem harmless. I'm scrolling instead of reflecting, overcommitting instead of resting, smiling instead of admitting I am tired, saying, it's fine when it is not quite fine. Craving builds in the space between what I feel and what I allow. Loneliness can exist even when I am deeply connected to myself, but this particular ache I have been describing feels different. It feels like the cost of long-term self-neglect disguised as strength. And there is something almost relieving about naming it correctly. If I am not lonely, I do not need to frantically expand my social life. If I am craving, I need to turn inward with curiosity instead of outward with urgency. This does not mean I stop valuing relationships. It does not mean I isolate. It does not mean I retreat from the world. It means I recognize that no one can fill a space I refuse to inhabit. And the most unsettling realization is this: the love I thought was missing might already be available, but I have not been positioned to receive it. Not because others are incapable, but because I have been slightly absent from myself. And absence, even subtle absence, creates hunger. When I understand that difference, something shifts, not dramatically, not overnight, but enough to make me pause before I text someone out of habit, before I accept an invitation out of reflex, before I blame another person for not sensing what I never voiced. Craving becomes information, and for the first time, I am willing to listen to it without immediately trying to escape it. The night I realized I was waiting to be chosen happened on an ordinary Tuesday night in Chicago. There was nothing cinematic about it, no rain against the windows, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just the steady hum of the city beyond my apartment walls and the faint glow of streetlights filtering through half-closed blinds. I had finished dinner. The dishes were drying in the rack. My phone lay on the coffee table. Screen dark, silent. I was sitting on the couch with a blanket over my legs, scrolling without really seeing what I was looking at. I had done everything right that day. I showed up to meetings prepared. I answered emails with clarity and patience. I squeezed in a workout before sunset. I called my mother back. I texted a friend who had been having a difficult week. I ordered groceries. I handled logistics. I had been the woman I always am, competent, responsive, steady. And yet there was this subtle, restless energy inside me. A thin wire pulled tight somewhere beneath my ribs. I kept glancing at my phone, not obsessively, not dramatically, just enough to reveal something I didn't want to name. I was waiting for a message that would feel intentional, waiting for someone to reach toward me first, waiting for an invitation that wasn't prompted by my initiative, waiting for a small, unmistakable sign that I had crossed someone's mind without effort. I told myself it was harmless. Everyone waits for texts. Everyone checks their phone at night. But the feeling beneath it was heavier than that. It wasn't about the notification. It was about being chosen. I wanted someone to look at their day, their options, their crowded mental landscape, and decide, without being nudged, that I mattered enough to move toward. And the realization came quietly, but it landed hard. I had built a life around being the chooser, the organizer, the initiator. I made the reservations. I sent the follow-up email. I scheduled the trip. I suggested the dinner. I kept momentum alive. I told myself I preferred it that way. I like efficiency. I like clarity. I like not waiting around for someone else to act. But that night, in the stillness, I saw something I had been avoiding. I wasn't just efficient. I was preemptive. I reached first, so I would never have to risk not being reached for. That distinction unsettled me, because if I am always the one extending, I never have to sit in the vulnerability of wondering whether I am wanted without effort. Waiting feels passive, and passivity has always made me uncomfortable. It feels like weakness, like relinquishing control, like handing someone else the pen in a story I have worked hard to write. So I told myself I didn't need to be chosen. I chose myself. I chose my career. I chose my routines. I chose my independence. But independence can quietly morph into insulation. That Tuesday night, staring at a silent phone, I felt the cost of always being self-sufficient. I realized I did want to be chosen, not in a desperate adolescent way, not in a way that erased my agency, but in a mature, steady way that says, you matter without having to prove it. You are desired without having to perform. You are prioritized without having to orchestrate it. And here was the part that caught me off guard. I was waiting for someone else to offer something I had never consistently offered myself. I had chosen my responsibilities. I had chosen my goals. And I had chosen my obligations. But had I chosen myself, not as a concept, not as a slogan, not as a productivity tool, had I chosen my own inner life as worthy of deliberate attention? As I sat there, the question felt almost accusatory. When was the last time I moved toward myself without agenda? When was the last time I set aside time, not because it fit neatly into a self-care checklist, but because I genuinely wanted to know what was happening inside me? I had been waiting to be selected for affection, for depth, for softness. But I had not selected myself for those things. I was efficient with myself. I scheduled workouts. I managed finances. I maintained order. But choosing myself in the way I was craving meant something different. It meant saying no to something external in order to say yes to something internal. And it meant resisting the reflex to fill every quiet evening with distraction. It meant sitting on that couch, feeling the discomfort of waiting and asking, what am I actually hoping someone else will give me right now? Reassurance? Excitement? A sense of being valued? And then the harder question, can I offer even a fraction of that to myself without outsourcing it? That night, I did not suddenly transform. I did not delete apps or make grand declarations. I did not swear off relationships or decide I would never wait for a text again. I simply stayed. I stayed on the couch. I put the phone face down. I let the discomfort swell instead of soothing it immediately with noise. And in that quiet, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. I'd been waiting to be chosen in romantic relationships, waiting to be chosen in friendships, and waiting to be chosen in rooms where I downplayed my presence, waiting for validation that I did not explicitly request. All the while, I was bypassing the simplest, most destabilizing act of all, choosing myself first, choosing myself not in isolation from others, but in alignment with them, choosing myself by honoring my needs before they curdled into resentment, choosing myself by acknowledging desire without shame, choosing myself by allowing vulnerability instead of always managing perception. The shock of that realization was not loud. It was quiet and steady. I could no longer pretend that my longing was entirely someone else's responsibility. I had been waiting, yes, but I had also been withholding tenderness from myself, withholding curiosity about my own depth, withholding the kind of deliberate attention I was hoping someone else would instinctively give me. That Tuesday night in Chicago did not change my life overnight, but it changed the direction of my gaze. Instead of scanning the horizon for someone to step forward, I began to turn inward and ask a more demanding question. If I am craving to be chosen, what would it look like to choose myself in ways that are concrete, consistent, and visible? The answer did not arrive all at once, but the waiting stopped feeling like helplessness. It began to feel like a mirror. And for the first time, I understood that the person holding the power to step toward me had been sitting on that couch all along. What it actually means to love myself. For most of my adult life, the phrase love myself sounded either indulgent or abstract, and it sounded like something printed on a candle in a boutique shop, something whispered during a yoga class, something that belonged to a younger version of me trying to repair a broken heart. It did not sound like something relevant to a woman who pays property taxes in Chicago, who manages retirement accounts, who schedules mammograms, who answers emails before 8 a.m. Love, in my world, was practical. It was responsibility. It was follow-through. It was making sure everyone had what they needed. It was staying when things were inconvenient. It was keeping promises. So when I began asking what it actually means to love myself, I had to dismantle a series of misconceptions first. It is not indulgence. It is not detachment. It is not becoming so self-focused that I drift away from everyone who depends on me. And it is not spa days or expensive purchases or curated mornings with perfect light. It is also not independence sharpened into armor. For years, I confused self-sufficiency with self-love. I told myself that because I could handle my own finances, make my own decisions, and navigate my own problems, I must be loving myself well. But competence is not intimacy. I can manage myself without truly knowing myself. Loving myself, I am learning, begins with something much quieter. It begins with attention, not the distracted kind, not the multitasking kind, not the I'll deal with that later kind. It begins with taking my inner life seriously. When I feel irritation rising in a conversation, I do not immediately smooth it over. I pause and ask why it is there. When I feel a flicker of excitement about something new, I do not dismiss it as impractical. I explore it, even if only in thought. Love means I stop gaslighting my own emotional responses. If I am hurt, I allow the hurt to register. If I am disappointed, I do not instantly rationalize it away. If I am proud of something I accomplished, I do not minimize it with self-deprecating humor. There is a discipline in this, a steady commitment to honesty that feels almost radical after decades of accommodation. But attention alone is not enough. Love also means protection, not dramatic ultimatums, not confrontations designed to prove strength. Protection is quieter than that. It looks like saying no without over-explaining. It looks like declining invitations that would stretch me thin. It looks like leaving a conversation when it turns subtly disrespectful instead of staying to prove resilience. Protection means I stop volunteering myself for depletion. For a long time, I wore exhaustion like a badge. I told myself that being tired meant I was useful, that being stretched thin meant I was valuable. Now I see something different. If I consistently sacrifice my well-being to maintain harmony, I am not loving myself. I am managing perception. Love draws a line, not to punish others, but to preserve integrity. And then there is investment. This is where self-love becomes concrete. Investment means I think about the woman I will be at 65, at 70, at 75. I think about her joints, her bones, her savings, her friendships, her sense of meaning. I make choices today that protect her. I lift weights not to punish my body, but to strengthen it. I schedule preventive screenings not out of fear, but out of care. Oh, I review my financial plans, not because I am anxious, but because security is a form of tenderness. I invest in therapy when I need it. I invest in learning. I invest in experiences that stretch my perspective instead of shrinking it. Love is long-term thinking. It is choosing what will sustain me, not just what will soothe me in the moment. There is also a subtler dimension to loving myself that I am only beginning to understand. It is allowing myself to take up emotional space. For years, I was comfortable being the stable one, the reasonable one, the calm one. But love asks me to be more than stable. It asks me to be honest. If I desire more depth in a relationship, love means I articulate it instead of silently resenting its absence. If I feel disconnected, now love means I examine my own contribution before assuming someone else is withholding. It is uncomfortable to hold myself accountable in this way. It would be easier to blame circumstances, easier to say that life is busy, that people are flawed, that this is just how midlife feels. But love does not hide behind generalities. It gets specific. It says, this is what I need. This is what I value. This is what I will no longer tolerate from myself. Because loving myself is not only about how I allow others to treat me. It is about how I treat me. Do I speak to myself with contempt when I make a mistake? Do I compare my body to women 10 years younger and call that realism? Do I dismiss my creative impulses as frivolous because they do not generate income? These are small betrayals. No one sees them. No one hears the tone of my inner voice. But I do, and over time those small betrayals accumulate. To love myself means I become aware of them. I soften the voice. I allow imperfection without turning it into indictment. It also means I stop outsourcing my sense of worth. Compliments are welcome. Affection is welcome. Appreciation is welcome. But they are additions, not foundations. If I depend on someone else to remind me that I am desirable, competent, interesting, or worthy, I remain perpetually vulnerable to their silence. Self-love stabilizes me, not in a way that eliminates longing, but in a way that prevents longing from turning into desperation. When I love myself, I am less likely to tolerate emotional crumbs. I am less likely to shrink in order to be accommodated. I am less likely to chase intensity as proof of significance. Instead, I begin to recognize a steadier kind of love, the kind that feels calm in my nervous system, the kind that does not require performance. Loving myself is not glamorous. It is repetitive. It is often invisible. It is practiced in small decisions made daily. It is choosing rest over scrolling. It is choosing clarity over avoidance. It is choosing honesty over convenience. It is treating my inner life as something sacred rather than incidental. And perhaps the most unexpected part of all is this: loving myself does not make me harder. It makes me more precise, more discerning, more grounded. When I know what I need and I honor it, I show up differently in every room. Not louder, not more demanding, just clearer. For years, I thought love was something that arrived. Now I understand it is something I practice. And the practice begins, loud quietly, with the way I meet myself when no one else is watching. Attention, the love language. I never gave myself, if I am honest. Attention has always been the love language I gave away most generously and withheld most consistently from myself. I can sense a shift in someone's tone before they finish their sentence. I notice when a friend's laughter sounds thinner than usual. I pick up on tension in a meeting before anyone names it. I have built an entire adult life on this skill, reading the room, anticipating needs, adjusting in real time. But for decades, I did not extend that same attentiveness inward. I monitored my schedule. I monitored my productivity. I monitored my weight, my calendar, my obligations. I did not monitor my emotional temperature. There is a difference between tracking performance and noticing feeling. When something irritated me, I categorized it as fatigue. When something hurt, I labeled it sensitivity. When something delighted me, I told myself not to get carried away. Attention, in my world, was external. I could sit across from someone in Chicago on a cold winter afternoon and make them feel completely heard. I could put my phone down, lean forward, ask thoughtful follow-up questions. I knew how to create space for another person's experience. But when I was alone, I filled space quickly. Podcasts in my ears while I walked, television murmuring in the background while I folded laundry, scrolling while waiting for water to boil, constant input, constant distraction. It looked harmless. It looked normal. But it kept me from hearing myself. Attention requires silence, and silence can be confronting. The first time I intentionally went for a walk without my phone, it felt almost uncomfortable. The streets of my neighborhood were familiar. The trees lining the sidewalks had begun to change color. I could hear my own footsteps against the pavement. Without music or a voice guiding me, my thoughts rose quickly. Not dramatic thoughts, not life-altering revelations, small, persistent ones. I am more tired than I admit. I felt dismissed in that conversation yesterday. I miss a version of myself I haven't made time for. These thoughts were not new. They had been circling in the background for months, maybe years, but I had not granted them full attention. I had swatted them away with productivity. Attention, I am discovering, is the first real act of intimacy with myself. It is sitting with a feeling long enough to understand it, instead of immediately fixing it. When I feel resentment now, I try not to override it with logic. I ask where it started. Did I agree to something I did not truly want? Did I say yes out of habit? Did I silence a preference to maintain ease? This kind of questioning requires patience. It requires me to slow down enough to notice patterns instead of just outcomes. For most of my life, I evaluated myself based on outcomes. Did I meet the deadline? Did I keep the peace? Did I handle the situation well? Now I am learning to evaluate something more subtle. Did I honor what I was feeling? Did I pause before overriding myself? Did I listen? Attention changes the texture of my days. When I wake up, instead of reaching for my phone immediately, I sometimes lie still for a few minutes and check in with my body. Is there tightness in my shoulders? Is my jaw clenched? Did I sleep restlessly? These are not dramatic discoveries, but they ground me. When I notice anxiety, I try to trace it. Is it tied to a conversation I am avoiding? A decision I have postponed? A boundary I have not articulated? Before, I would have powered through the day and labeled the tension as just stress. Now I see that stress often carries information. Attention also means acknowledging joy without rushing past it. If a conversation leaves me feeling energized, I linger in that sensation. I ask myself why it mattered. If a quiet morning with coffee feels unexpectedly peaceful, I take note. What about this is nourishing? The pace, the light, the absence of expectation. Without attention, our joy becomes fleeting. With attention, it becomes instructive. There is a humility in this process. I have to admit that I do not always know myself as well as I assumed. For years, I described myself in efficient summaries: independent, capable, calm, low drama. Now I see that those descriptions, while not untrue, were incomplete. Attention reveals nuance. It reveals that I can be strong and still crave softness, that I can be competent and still feel uncertain, that I can be stable and still long for expansion. It also reveals when I am operating on autopilot. There are days when I move through tasks mechanically. I answer emails, I attend meetings, I cook dinner, I respond politely. Everything gets done. But if I pause at the end of the day and ask how I felt inside those hours, the answer is sometimes vague. I was there, but I was not fully present. Attention pulls me back. Sometimes I sit at my kitchen table after dinner, not with a notebook or a structured exercise, but with a simple question. What did today feel like? Not what did I accomplish? What did it feel like? Was there tension, ease, boredom, quiet satisfaction, subtle disappointment? The answers are rarely dramatic, but they are honest. And honesty over time builds trust. When I consistently pay attention to myself, I begin to trust that I will not abandon my own experience. I will not override my signals. I will not ignore the early signs of burnout or dissatisfaction. Attention is not glamorous. It does not produce immediate transformation. It does not impress anyone, but it changes the relationship I have with myself. When I give someone my attention, I am telling them they matter. Their words matter. Their feelings matter. Their presence matters. When I give myself attention, I am communicating the same thing inward. My experience matters. My reactions matter. My desires matter. For a woman who has spent decades being attuned to everyone else, turning that attentiveness inward feels almost radical, not because it is loud, but because it is deliberate. Attention is the quiet beginning of love. It is how I stop drifting past myself. It is how I begin to feel anchored inside my own life, instead of merely functioning within it. And the more consistently I practice it, the less invisible I feel, even when I am the only one in the room. Protection. Boundaries without drama. For most of my life, I believed boundaries had to be loud to be real. I pictured confrontation, raised voices, dramatic ultimatums, doors closing, relationships fracturing. I did not see myself in those images. I am not theatrical. I do not enjoy conflict. I do not feel powerful when I dominate a conversation. I prefer steadiness. I prefer reason. I prefer calm. So instead of setting boundaries, I adjusted. If something bothered me, I explained it away. If someone overstepped, I told myself they probably didn't mean to. If I felt stretched thin, I reassured myself that it was temporary. I thought I was being mature. In truth, I was avoiding the discomfort of protection. Protection requires friction, not explosive friction, not destructive friction, but the kind that occurs when I choose myself in a moment where it would be easier to choose harmony. There is a subtle cost to always being agreeable. At work, I would say yes to additional responsibilities because I could handle them, and I did not want to be the difficult one, the uncooperative one, the woman who can't manage. In friendships, I accommodated schedules that exhausted me. I listened for hours without admitting I was depleted. I traveled when I would have preferred to stay home because I did not want to disappoint anyone. In relationships, I swallowed small disappointments. I told myself that no one is perfect, that stability matters more than idealism, that my expectations might be unrealistic. None of these decisions seemed catastrophic, but over time the pattern became clear. When I do not protect myself in small moments, I eventually feel unprotected in larger ones. Protection begins long before resentment erupts. It begins in the micro decisions. The email I do not have to answer at 10:30 p.m., and the invitation I can decline without a detailed explanation. The comment I can gently correct, instead of pretending it did not sting. For years, I believed that my strength was my endurance, that my ability to absorb discomfort without reacting made me resilient. But endurance without boundaries is erosion. It slowly wears down my sense of self. The first time I practiced a quiet boundary, it felt almost anticlimactic. A colleague asked if I could take on another project with a tight deadline. My calendar was already full. My instinct was to say yes and figure it out. That had always been my pattern. Instead, I paused. I looked at my schedule. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, and I said calmly, I can't take that on right now without compromising my existing commitments. No apology. No long justification. Just clarity. The world did not collapse. There was a brief silence, then the conversation moved on. But inside me, something shifted. I realized that boundaries do not require spectacle. They require self-trust. They require me to believe that my capacity has limits, and that honoring those limits is not selfish. In relationships, protection can feel more delicate. It is easier to say no to a project than to say, that hurt me. For a long time, I avoided naming emotional injuries because I feared appearing dramatic. I told myself that mature love meant letting things go, but letting things go and letting myself be diminished are not the same. If a partner consistently interrupted me, I would brush it off. If my needs were deprioritized, I would adjust. If I felt unseen, I would question whether I was asking for too much. My protection asks a harder question. What if I am not asking for too much? What if I am simply asking the wrong person, or asking without conviction? Setting boundaries without drama means I do not weaponize my pain, but I also do not erase it. It means saying, I need this, without making it a test. It means saying, that doesn't work for me, without turning it into a threat. It means trusting that if someone responds poorly to reasonable limits, that response is information. For a woman who has prided herself on being adaptable, this feels unfamiliar. Adaptability made me likable. Protection makes me precise, and precision can be misinterpreted by those who benefited from my flexibility. There were moments when people were surprised by my boundaries, not angry necessarily, just confused. You never used to mind. They were right, and I didn't used to mind, or more accurately, I used to mind, but I didn't say so. Protection is not about changing overnight into someone unrecognizable. It is about becoming congruent. If I say I value my time, I must protect it. If I say I value honesty, I must practice it even when it feels awkward. If I say I value my well-being, I must stop volunteering myself for exhaustion. There is also an internal dimension to protection that I am only beginning to understand. I must protect myself from my own harshness. When I make a mistake, I can correct it without humiliation. When I feel insecure, I can address it without contempt. When I fall short of a goal, I can recalibrate without calling myself a failure. The voice inside my head does not need to be ruthless in order to keep me disciplined. Discipline without compassion is not strength. It is fear in disguise. Protection, then, becomes an act of quiet loyalty. I become loyal to my energy, loyal to my values, loyal to the woman I am becoming rather than the persona I have maintained. There will always be moments when I misjudge, when I say yes out of habit, when I overextend and feel the familiar drain. Protection is not perfection. It is practice. Each boundary I set, no matter how small, reinforces a simple truth. My needs are not inconveniences. They are signals, and when I honor them, I am not becoming harder to love. I am becoming clearer, clearer about what I can offer, clearer about what I require, clearer about what I will no longer negotiate away in the name of peace. Drama seeks attention. Boundaries seek alignment. I am no longer interested in spectacle. I am interested in integrity. And integrity, and I am learning, is one of the purest forms of self-love I have ever practiced. Investment, the standard I set for myself. For a long time, I believed investment was something I directed outward. I invested in my education. I invested in my career. I invested in my home. I invested in relationships that felt promising. I understood compound interest. I understood long-term planning. I understood the discipline of putting something away today so it could grow tomorrow. But I rarely thought about the standard I was setting for myself, not the standard I projected to the world, the internal one, the standard that quietly determines how I treat my body, my time, my energy, my future. Investment, I am learning, is the most practical form of self-respect. It is easy to talk about love in abstract terms. It is much harder to examine where my money and my hours and my focus actually go. When I look honestly, I can see patterns. I have spent generously on others, gifts, dinners, thoughtful gestures. I have invested in shared experiences, in making memories, in creating comfort for the people I care about. But there were years when I hesitated to spend on myself unless it was justified. Practical, necessary, a new coat, necessary, a continuing education course, necessary, a preventative health screening not covered by insurance, maybe optional. It is strange how quickly I could rationalize postponing care for myself. Midlife has changed that calculation. When I think about the woman I will be at 65, 70, 75, I no longer see a vague silhouette. I see someone specific. She has my hands. She has my history. She has the accumulation of every decision I am making now. And if I do not invest in her, no one else can. So investment has become less about image and more about stewardship. I lift weights not because I am chasing a smaller dress size, but because bone density matters. I care about being able to carry groceries up the stairs at 70. I care about balance. I care about strength that allows independence without isolation. I schedule annual checkups without postponing them for convenience. I ask questions in doctors' offices instead of nodding politely. I take my sleep seriously. I turn off screens earlier than I used to, even when it feels inconvenient. These are not dramatic gestures. They are signals. Signals that I expect longevity. Signals that I value vitality. Signals that I am worth protecting in the long run. Financially, investment has taken on a similar tone. There was a time when I thought security would come from partnership. 2 incomes, shared responsibility, a mutual future. Now, whether I am partnered or not, I approach my finances with personal clarity. I review retirement accounts. I understand my investments. I plan for contingencies, not from fear, from self-trust. If life shifts, as it often does, I want to know that I have created stability for myself, that I am not dependent on someone else's consistency for my own survival. Emotional investment is more subtle. It looks like therapy when I need it, not because I am broken, but because I value insight. It looks like carving out time for reflection instead of filling every spare hour with noise. It looks like choosing friendships that feel reciprocal instead of simply familiar. There were relationships in my past that drained more than they nourished. Not abusive, not dramatic, just imbalanced. For years I stayed because history felt like an investment that needed protecting. I confused longevity with value. Now I understand that true investment yields growth. If a connection consistently diminishes me, it is not compounding in my favor. Investment also means choosing experiences that expand me rather than confirm who I have always been. A writing workshop in Seattle, a strength training program that intimidates me slightly, a solo weekend in Santa Fe where I am not performing any role. These choices are not escapes. They are expansions. They remind me that I am not finished, that midlife is not maintenance mode, that there are still versions of me unfolding, and the standard I set for myself becomes visible in these decisions. Do I expect depth in my life? Then I must invest in spaces where depth is possible. Do I expect health? Then I must support it consistently. Do I expect respect from others? Then I must demonstrate it in how I allocate my own resources. There is also an uncomfortable dimension to investment. It requires saying no to short-term comfort, ordering takeout again instead of cooking something nourishing, staying up late scrolling instead of sleeping, saying yes to another obligation instead of protecting recovery time. Every choice compounds, not in dramatic leaps, but in quiet increments. If I consistently choose convenience over care, the results will eventually show up in my energy, in my health, in my emotional resilience. Investment is not about perfection. It is about trajectory. I do not need to optimize every detail of my life. I do not need to track every calorie or analyze every dollar. But I do need to be honest about the direction I am moving. For years, I invested heavily in appearing stable. Now I am investing in actually feeling anchored. That shift changes how I approach my days. When I think about whether to commit to something, I ask, does this align with the standard I am setting for my life? Not the standard society sets, not the standard my peers uphold, my standard. Is this strengthening me or depleting me? Is this building something sustainable or just maintaining appearances? The answers are not always obvious, but asking the question changes the tone of my choices. I am no longer interested in living reactively, letting circumstances dictate my well-being. Should I want to be deliberate, not rigid, not obsessive, just deliberate? Investment, at its core, is a declaration. It says, I believe my future matters. It says, I expect my life to continue unfolding in meaningful ways. It says, I am worth the effort required to create stability, vitality, and depth. No one else can set that standard for me. They can influence it. They can benefit from it. They can admire it. But they cannot establish it. When I invest in myself, physically, financially, emotionally, I am not just preparing for later. I am communicating something to myself now. I am worth planning for. I am worth strengthening. I am worth securing. And the more consistently I act from that belief, the less I look outside for reassurance that I matter. Because my own decisions have already made it clear. The 5 love languages, to rewritten in midlife. When I was younger, the idea of love languages felt romantic. It was something you discussed over dinner, something you used to decode a partner. Words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, gifts, physical touch, a framework to help 2 people understand each other better. In midlife, I see it differently. These languages are not just relational tools, they are diagnostic tools. They reveal how I have been loving others and how I have been neglecting myself. Rewriting them now, at this stage of my life, feels less like a trend and more like a reckoning. Words of affirmation used to mean compliments, encouragement, verbal reassurance from someone else. Now it means the tone of my internal dialogue. No one hears the way I speak to myself in the quiet of my Chicago kitchen when I replay a mistake. And no one hears the subtle criticism when I look in the mirror under unforgiving light. No one hears the minimization when I accomplish something difficult and immediately downplay it. Midlife has forced me to confront that voice. I would never speak to a friend the way I sometimes speak to myself. I would not call her behind. I would not call her washed up. I would not measure her worth by productivity or youth. So why do I do it inwardly? Rewriting words of affirmation in midlife means I become responsible for the narrative running beneath my days. When I notice harshness, I soften it, not with delusion, but with proportion. When I catch myself spiraling into self-doubt, I pause and ask whether the story is factual or inherited. I do not inflate myself. I do not lie. I simply stop weaponizing my own mind against myself. Quality time used to mean shared experiences, date nights, long conversations, weekend getaways. Now it means intentional solitude without escape. I used to equate being alone with efficiency. I would use that time to catch up on tasks, to optimize, to prepare. Now I am learning to sit in my own company without agenda. A solo weekend in Santa Fe taught me something I did not expect. Without familiar roles, no colleague, no friend, no partner, I felt slightly disoriented at first. Who am I when no one needs me to be anything? The first evening I reached for my phone out of habit. I wanted to document, to share, to fill the silence. Instead, I walked through the quiet streets and let myself feel small in a good way. I noticed the adobe walls glowing at sunset. I listened to my own footsteps. I allowed boredom to surface and pass. Quality time, rewritten in midlife, is not about entertainment. It is about presence. It is about giving myself undivided attention without distraction, without performance, without turning the moment into content. Acts of service once meant doing things for others, cooking meals, running errands, anticipating needs. Now it includes doing practical things for my future self, reviewing my estate plan, updating beneficiaries, organizing important documents so that if something happens, chaos does not follow. These are not romantic gestures, but they are deeply loving. There is something powerful about knowing that I have put my affairs in order, not out of fear, but out of care. Care for myself, care for the people who might one day have to navigate my absence. acts of service in midlife are often invisible. And no one applauds me for scheduling a bone density scan. No one posts about updating insurance policies. But these actions create stability beneath the surface of my life. They communicate seriousness. They say, I matter enough to be prepared. Gifts used to feel like indulgence. A handbag, a piece of jewelry, a treat after a hard week. Now I approach gifts with more scrutiny. If I could not show it to anyone, would I still want it? That question has saved me from more than a few impulsive purchases. The gifts I value now align with identity rather than image. A beautifully made journal that I actually write in. A high-quality pair of walking shoes because I intend to keep exploring cities on foot. A class that expands my thinking instead of cluttering my closet. The most meaningful gifts are not flashy. They are functional in a way that supports who I am becoming. Physical touch, perhaps the most intimate of the languages, has also evolved. It is no longer about desirability. It is about inhabiting my body fully. For years, I evaluated my body from the outside. How it looked in photos, how it compared, how it changed. Now I am more interested in how it feels from the inside. Strength training in a studio in Chicago, feeling my muscles engage. A deep stretch after a long day. A massage that releases tension I did not realize I was holding. Physical touch, directed inward, means treating my body as a home rather than a project. It means placing a hand over my chest when I feel anxious instead of dismissing the sensation. It means allowing myself to rest without earning it first. Rewriting these love languages in midlife has revealed something sobering. For years, I fluently expressed them outward. I offered encouragement. I planned thoughtful time together. I did practical favors. I gave meaningful gifts. I offered physical affection. But I did not consistently direct that same fluency inward. Midlife is stripping away illusions. It is showing me where I have been generous and where I have been withholding. The rewrite is not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, deliberate. I speak to myself with more respect. I spend time with myself without agenda. I take practical steps to protect my future. I choose gifts that reflect depth instead of impulse. I inhabit my body with more gratitude than critique. None of this is flashy. It will not trend, but it feels grounded. And perhaps that is what love looks like now. Not fireworks, not urgency, not validation, just a steady translation of care across every language I once reserved for someone else. The marriage that wasn't loud but was empty. Not all marriages end in explosions. Some simply go quiet. There are no slammed doors, no betrayal dramatic enough to retell at dinner parties. No villain I can point to and say, that was the moment everything broke. From the outside, it looks stable. Two adults functioning well. Shared calendars, shared expenses, shared history. We attend events together. We sit at the same table for holidays. We discuss logistics with efficiency. If someone were to ask, "How's your marriage?" I could easily answer, "It's good." And in many measurable ways, it is. There is respect. There is familiarity. There is partnership in the practical sense. The house runs, and the bills get paid. The responsibilities are divided. But there is a kind of emptiness that does not scream. It hums. It hums in the space between conversations that never go deeper than surface updates. It hums in the way we both reach for our phones at night instead of reaching for each other. It hums in the absence of curiosity. We are not fighting. We are not connecting either. For years, I told myself that this was maturity, that the intensity of early love is not sustainable, that comfort replaces spark, and that this is simply what long-term partnership becomes. And there is truth in that. Love evolves, chemistry settles. Life grows heavier with responsibilities. But what I began to notice was not just the absence of fireworks. It was the absence of being seen. We discussed schedules. We coordinated plans. We solved problems. But when was the last time he asked me what I was afraid of? When was the last time I told him what I was longing for without filtering it into something reasonable? The silence was not imposed. It was co-created. I had become so skilled at being stable that I stopped revealing uncertainty. So skilled at being low drama that I avoided discomfort. So accustomed to managing my own interior world that I did not invite him into it. It is easier to maintain peace than to risk depth. Peace keeps the house quiet. Depth shakes it. I cannot blame him for not reaching places I did not open. At some point, our conversations narrowed. Not intentionally, gradually. We talked about work, about family obligations, about errands, about the news. We did not talk about the quiet ache I carried, and I did not ask about his. And there is a particular loneliness that can exist inside a stable marriage. It is not the loneliness of abandonment. It is the loneliness of parallel lives. Two competent adults moving efficiently side by side. We are not cruel to each other. We are not careless. We are simply distant. The most unsettling realization for me was not that the marriage lacked something. It was that I had outsourced my emotional care. Somewhere along the way, I decided that if I felt unseen, it was his responsibility to notice. If I felt disconnected, it was his responsibility to initiate reconnection. If I felt undernourished emotionally, it was his responsibility to fill that gap. I waited. Not dramatically, not resentfully at first, just subtly, waiting for him to ask deeper questions, waiting for him to plan something intentional, waiting for him to sense the shift in me. But I had spent years perfecting the art of appearing fine. How could he detect what I worked so hard to conceal? There were nights when we sat on opposite ends of the couch, both tired, both scrolling. The television flickered in the background. Nothing was wrong, and yet something was missing. Not passion necessarily, presence. It is difficult to admit that a marriage can be intact and still feel empty. There is no script for that, no clear path forward, no obvious crisis to justify change, just a quiet knowing. I began to ask myself uncomfortable questions. Have I been asking this relationship to give me something I have not cultivated within myself? Have I expected him to soothe insecurities I have never addressed, to validate worth I have not fully claimed, and to provide excitement when I have stopped being curious about my own life? These questions are not indictments. They are clarifications. It would be easier to point outward, to say he stopped trying, to say life got busy, to say this is just what happens after years together. But if I am honest, I stopped trying too, not trying to keep the marriage alive. We maintained it well. I stopped trying to remain emotionally visible. I stopped risking being misunderstood. I stopped revealing the parts of me that felt uncertain or evolving. Midlife changes a woman. My desires shift. My priorities sharpen. My tolerance for superficiality decreases. I want conversations that linger. I want intimacy that feels grounded, not performative. If I do not articulate that shift, how can he respond to it? The emptiness I now see was not solely about him. It was about me retreating quietly, about me expecting connection without vulnerability, about me mistaking stability for fulfillment. This does not mean the marriage is doomed. It does not mean I have failed. It does not mean he has. It means I can no longer pretend that functioning equals flourishing. If I want depth, I must create conditions for it. If I want to feel chosen, I must first choose to show up fully. The marriage that wasn't loud, but was empty taught me something essential. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is avoidance wrapped in politeness. And if I am unwilling to disturb the surface, I cannot complain about the lack of depth beneath it. Whether this marriage evolves, deepens, or eventually changes form is not a conclusion I rush toward. What matters now is clarity. Clarity that I cannot outsource my aliveness. Clarity that no partner can compensate for my own disengagement. Clarity that love, at this stage of my life, requires courage more than comfort. The emptiness was not a verdict. It was an invitation to step back into the room fully, not as the stable one, not as the low-maintenance one, but as the whole woman I am becoming. Dating myself without isolating myself. When I first began to understand what it meant to turn toward myself, I almost made a mistake. I confused self-connection with self-sufficiency. There's a thin line between choosing myself and retreating from everyone else. After years of overextending, it felt tempting to swing in the opposite direction, to protect my time fiercely, to decline invitations automatically, to tell myself I did not need anyone. Independence has always been seductive to me. It feels clean, controlled, safe, but isolation wears a similar disguise. I had to ask myself an honest question. Am I dating myself to deepen my life, or am I withdrawing to avoid disappointment? There is a difference. Dating myself means I treat my own company as valuable. I plan evenings intentionally. I choose restaurants because I enjoy them, not because they impress anyone. I walk along Lake Michigan in Chicago at sunset without rushing, without narrating the moment for someone else. Isolation means I close doors out of fatigue. I stop responding to invitations not because they misalign, but because vulnerability feels inconvenient. I convince myself that no one understands me anyway. Dating myself expands my world. Isolation shrinks it. I have learned that self-love does not eliminate my need for connection. It clarifies it. There are seasons when I have leaned too heavily on one person for emotional nourishment. A partner, a best friend, someone who became the primary witness to my life. When that dynamic shifted, as dynamics inevitably do, I felt unsteady. It was not because I was incapable of standing alone. It was because my social world had narrowed. I began to think about connection in layers. There are the people closest to me, the ones who know my history, who have seen me at my most vulnerable. There are the middle circle relationships, friends, allies, colleagues who share interests and offer companionship. And there are the outer circle connections, the barista who recognizes my order, the neighbor I greet on morning walks, the women I see regularly at the strength training studio. For a while, and I expected my inner circle to fulfill every relational need: depth, excitement, intellectual stimulation, humor, comfort. That is a heavy burden for any single relationship. Dating myself has allowed me to redistribute expectation. If I crave intellectual conversation, I join a book club instead of resenting my partner for not sharing my enthusiasm for certain topics. If I crave creative energy, I sign up for a writing workshop in Seattle rather than waiting for inspiration to appear at my kitchen table. If I crave physical challenge, I commit to training sessions in Chicago where other women push themselves quietly and consistently. Connection becomes diversified. When I invest in aligned rooms, I reduce pressure on any one relationship to carry everything. But there is still risk. It takes courage to walk into a room alone, and to show up to a volunteer organization or a hiking group without knowing who will be there, to introduce myself without rehearsing a perfect version of who I am. Dating myself does not remove that discomfort. It strengthens my capacity to tolerate it. When I know I enjoy my own company, I do not enter social spaces desperate for validation. I enter curious. Curiosity is softer than need. There were evenings when I stayed home intentionally, not because I was excluded, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to cook something slowly, pour a glass of wine, and sit with a book without interruption. And there were evenings when I chose to attend an event even though it would have been easier to stay home. The key difference is agency. Isolation feels reactive. Dating myself feels deliberate. I am not hiding from the world. I am engaging with it from a grounded center. I have also had to examine how technology influences this balance. It is easy to feel socially saturated while being emotionally undernourished. Messages, group chats, notifications, a constant stream of contact, but contact is not the same as connection. There were times I convinced myself I had a vibrant social life because my phone was busy. In reality, I had very few conversations that left me feeling expanded. So I began to prioritize fewer, deeper interactions. Coffee with one woman where we speak honestly about midlife transitions. A long walk with a friend where we discuss fears about aging parents or changing bodies. A small dinner instead of a loud gathering. Dating myself gave me the clarity to choose quality over quantity. And it also revealed when I was using busyness to avoid introspection. If every evening is filled, there is no space for reflection. If every weekend is scheduled, there is no room to notice what I actually need. I no longer want a life that looks socially impressive but feels internally hollow. I want a life that feels integrated. There is a steadiness in knowing I can sit alone at a restaurant without discomfort, and also initiate a gathering without anxiety. Self-connection and community are not opposites. They are partners. When I am anchored in myself, I approach others with openness rather than urgency. I do not grasp. I do not cling. I do not demand that they complete something I have neglected. I meet them as a whole person. That changes the energy of every interaction. Dating myself has not reduced my desire for companionship. It has refined it. I no longer want noise. I want resonance. And resonance requires both solitude and shared space. It requires me to know who I am when no one is watching, and to risk being seen when others are. The balance is delicate. I will sometimes lean too far inward. I will sometimes overextend outward. But now I can recognize the difference. When I stay home, because I cherish my own presence, it feels warm. When I stay home because I fear disappointment, it feels tight. When I go out because I am curious about connection, it feels expansive. When I go out because I'm afraid of missing something, it feels frantic. The distinction matters. Dating myself without isolating myself is less about rules and more about awareness. It is choosing my company without rejecting the world. It is building a life where solitude restores me and community enriches me. And perhaps most importantly, it is understanding that loving myself does not mean I do not need others. It means I meet them from a place of fullness rather than hunger. The rooms that changed my life for a long time, I believed connection was a matter of effort. If I wanted better relationships, I needed to try harder, be more open, be more available, be more patient. But what I did not understand was that environment shapes energy. I was trying to bloom in rooms that were never designed for me. There is a subtle exhaustion that comes from constantly translating yourself, from softening your interests, from shrinking your curiosity, from pretending certain conversations are enough when they are not. I would leave social gatherings feeling vaguely drained, and even when nothing was wrong. The people were kind, the setting was pleasant, but something in me felt undernourished. It took me years to realize that not every room is aligned with who I am becoming. and that misalignment is not a moral failure. It is information. The first room that shifted something in me was a small strength training studio in Chicago. It was not glamorous. Exposed brick, heavy weights, chalk dust in the air, women in their 40s and 50s lifting quietly, deliberately. No one was performing. No one was trying to be impressive. They were building themselves. I remember watching a woman older than me deadlift with steady focus. No theatrics, no apology for taking up space. Just competence embodied. Something in me recognized that room as truthful. In that space, strength was not aesthetic. It was functional. It was long-term thinking made visible. It was investment without explanation. I did not have to justify why I cared about vitality. I did not have to pretend I was chasing youth. We were all there for sustainability. That room changed my relationship with my body and, unexpectedly, with my self-respect. Another room that altered me was a writing workshop in Seattle. I arrived feeling slightly exposed. Writing has always been private for me, structured perhaps, but intimate. Sitting in a circle with women who spoke honestly about midlife, about aging parents, shifting identities, quiet marriages, rediscovered ambition, felt like inhaling fresh air. No one rushed to fix each other. No one minimized grief. No one competed over who was most accomplished. We spoke in layers, and for the first time in a long time. I did not feel like I had to summarize myself into something digestible. That room reminded me that depth requires proximity to others who value depth. I had been trying to have meaningful conversations in environments built for surface exchange. It is not that those spaces were wrong. They simply were not aligned. Then there was Santa Fe. I had taken that solo weekend thinking solitude would be the main lesson. And it was. But what surprised me most was a small art gallery I wandered into on a quiet afternoon. The room was nearly empty. Sunlight filtered across textured walls. A few visitors moved slowly, almost reverently. Standing there, I felt something unexpected. Permission. Permission to linger, to absorb, to not rush toward the next thing, to let beauty affect me without needing to articulate it immediately. That room changed the tempo of my attention. It showed me that some environments invite reflection without demanding output. I began to see that rooms are not just physical spaces. They are emotional climates. A volunteer board meeting can feel aligned if the mission resonates deeply. A book club can feel expansive if the conversation stretches beyond plot summaries into personal truth. A dinner party can feel nourishing if curiosity outweighs performance. The mistake I made for years was assuming I had to adapt to every room I entered. Now I understand that I can choose. If I consistently leave a space feeling smaller, more guarded, or slightly off balance, I pay attention to that pattern. If I leave feeling energized, thoughtful, or quietly inspired, I note that too. The rooms that changed my life were not loud, and they did not announce themselves as transformative. They simply fit, and in that fit, something relaxed inside me. I no longer felt like I was managing perception. I was participating. There is courage in seeking out the right rooms. It means admitting that some long-standing spaces no longer align. It means risking awkwardness when I try something new. It means walking into unfamiliar environments alone. I remember the first time I attended a hiking group in Boulder during a work trip. I almost turned back. I did not know anyone. I questioned whether I would connect. I wondered if I would feel out of place. But the moment we began climbing, conversation flowed naturally. Shared exertion dissolved superficiality quickly. By the end of the hike, I had spoken more honestly with strangers than I had in some long-standing social settings. That is the power of aligned rooms. They accelerate authenticity. When I place myself in spaces built around values, I genuinely hold strength, creativity, curiosity, growth. I do not have to perform interest. I simply show up. The contrast has made me more discerning. I no longer chase rooms because they look impressive. I do not attend events solely for networking or optics. I am less interested in being seen in the right places and more interested in being shaped by the right environments. This shift has softened something in me. Instead of blaming myself when I feel disconnected, I ask whether the setting supports connection. Instead of assuming I am difficult, I consider whether I am misaligned. The rooms that changed my life did not rescue me. They reflected me. They showed me who I am when I am not editing myself. And that reflection has been more powerful than any advice. I cannot control every environment I enter. Work obligations, family events, social expectations will always exist. But I can be intentional about where I seek renewal. When I choose rooms aligned with my values, I am not escaping my life. I am enriching it. And the more I honor that alignment, the less I feel like I am waiting to be understood, because I have finally placed myself where understanding is possible. Grieving the years I waited, there is a particular kind of grief that does not come from death, divorce, or disaster. It comes from recognition of how long I waited, not waited passively. Not wasted years in obvious stagnation. I built a career. I maintained relationships. I showed up for my responsibilities in Chicago and beyond. I traveled. I achieved. I functioned. But beneath all of that movement, there was waiting. Waiting to feel fully chosen. Waiting to feel deeply seen. Waiting for the right time to prioritize myself. Waiting for someone to notice the parts of me I had quietly hidden. When I first realized this, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness. It was not dramatic. It did not collapse my days, but it lingered, especially in quiet moments. I began thinking about the woman I was at 35, even at 40. How many times did I override an instinct because it seemed inconvenient? How many times did I silence a desire because it felt impractical? How many times did I tell myself that later would be better? Later, when the kids are older. Later, when the promotion is secure. Later, when the marriage feels more stable. Later, when life calms down. Later became a habit. And habits repeated over years shape identity. I do not regret my responsibilities. I do not regret loving people. I do not regret the stability I worked hard to create. What I grieve is the delay in trusting my own voice, the delay in taking my inner life seriously, the delay in allowing myself to want more without apologizing for it. There were rooms I stayed in too long because leaving felt disruptive. There were conversations I avoided because clarity might have required change. There were dreams I categorized as indulgent because they did not align neatly with the version of me others expected. I waited to be ready. But readiness, I now understand, is often a moving target. I think about the years I sat on the couch at night feeling that quiet ache and told myself it was just fatigue. And I think about the way I minimized loneliness inside a marriage that looked functional. I think about the subtle resentment that accumulated when I consistently chose ease over honesty. There is grief in recognizing how much of my life I lived on autopilot, not asleep, not unconscious, but contained. I contained my ambition so it would not intimidate. I contained my disappointment so it would not disrupt. I contained my longing so it would not inconvenience. Containment kept everything orderly. It also kept me small. The hardest part of this grief is facing the younger version of myself with compassion rather than judgment. It would be easy to criticize her. Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you choose yourself earlier? But when I look at her closely, and I see someone doing the best she could with the information she had, I see a woman shaped by cultural expectations, by generational narratives, by the belief that stability equaled success. She was not weak, she was cautious. She believed that if she worked hard enough and loved well enough, fulfillment would follow naturally. She did not yet understand that fulfillment requires intention. Grieving the years I waited is not about rewriting history. It is about honoring the cost of silence. There were seasons when I sensed that something was off, a subtle misalignment, a desire for depth that felt inconvenient in the face of daily obligations. Instead of exploring it, I told myself to be grateful. Gratitude is beautiful, but gratitude used as a muzzle is dangerous. It kept me from asking for more, and it kept me from examining whether the life I built also nourished me. I remember moments vividly now, sitting at dinner with friends, smiling, contributing to conversation, and feeling like I was hovering just slightly outside myself. Driving home from work, staring at the skyline of Chicago, feeling both proud and restless. I told myself this was normal, midlife restlessness, hormones, stress. But underneath those rationalizations was something simpler. I wanted to feel alive in a way I had postponed. There is grief in acknowledging that time is finite. At 45, at 50, at 55, I no longer have the luxury of endless postponement. The future feels both expansive and more defined. The years ahead are precious, and the years behind me are real. Grieving them does not diminish them. It integrates them. Now I allow myself to feel the sadness without turning it into shame. Yes, I waited. Yes, I delayed. Yes, I tolerated longer than I needed to, but I also learned. I learned how to provide stability. I learned how to love generously. I learned how to build a life from the ground up. Now I am learning how to inhabit it fully. Grief, when faced directly, becomes clarifying. It sharpens my awareness of what I will no longer postpone. It makes me less willing to settle for surface connection, less willing to override intuition, less willing to confuse peace with stagnation. The woman I was deserves acknowledgement, not criticism. She carried responsibilities with grace. She kept promises. She did not collapse under pressure, but she did not always advocate for herself. I cannot change her choices. I can honor her by making different ones now. Grieving the years I waited is not about dwelling in regret. It is about recognizing the quiet cost of self-abandonment and deciding that cost is no longer acceptable. When I allow myself to feel that grief fully, it softens into resolve, not a loud declaration, just a steady understanding. Time is not something I can rewind, but it is something I can inhabit more honestly from this point forward, and that, perhaps, is the most respectful way to honor every version of myself who waited for permission she already possessed. Becoming the woman who doesn't beg to be loved. There was a time when I did not think of myself as someone who begged. I was too composed for that, too self-sufficient, too proud. I did not plead. I did not chase overtly. I did not send paragraphs demanding reassurance. But begging does not always look desperate. Oh, sometimes it looks like over-accommodating. Sometimes it looks like lowering standards quietly, like laughing off dismissive comments, like pretending not to care when I do, like staying slightly longer than my dignity prefers because leaving would be inconvenient. Begging, in its most refined form, is performing ease in the presence of emotional scarcity. I have done that, not loudly, not theatrically, but consistently enough that it shaped my relationships. I would sense distance and respond by trying harder, more patience, more understanding, more flexibility. I would tell myself that love requires effort, and I would offer it generously. What I did not see at first was that I was negotiating with my own worth. If I give enough, maybe I will receive enough. If I am calm enough, maybe I will be chosen. If I am undemanding enough, maybe I will be cherished. These thoughts were not conscious bargains. They were subtle calculations shaped by years of conditioning. Women like me are praised for being low maintenance, for not asking for too much, for being easy to be with. Easy is seductive, but easy is not the same as fulfilled. Becoming the woman who doesn't beg to be loved has required a confrontation with my own fear of being too much, too emotional, too ambitious, too opinionated, too complex. There were times in my marriage when I muted certain desires because I did not want to disrupt stability. Times when I adjusted my tone to keep the peace. Times when I chose silence over clarity because it felt more mature. But maturity without authenticity breeds quiet resentment. I began to notice how often I preemptively softened myself, how often I anticipated potential rejection and adjusted before it even occurred. I would phrase requests cautiously. I would downplay needs. I would laugh while expressing disappointment to make it lighter, easier to digest. And then, alone, I would feel the familiar ache of not being fully met. Becoming the woman who does not beg has not meant becoming rigid or unyielding. It has meant becoming congruent. If I value depth, I say so. If I want more presence, I articulate it. If something feels misaligned, I do not immediately translate it into self-blame. This shift feels subtle from the outside, but inside, it changes everything. I no longer audition. I no longer shapeshift to fit the expectations of a room. When I walk into a space, whether it is a dinner party in Chicago or a workshop in Seattle, I carry myself with less calculation. If I connect, I connect. If I do not force it. There was a time when I would have stayed in conversations that drained me just to prove sociability. I would have entertained dynamics that felt imbalanced just to avoid being alone. Now I understand that being alone is not the threat. Being misaligned is. Begging often disguises itself as loyalty. I told myself that staying, accommodating, and persevering were virtues, and sometimes they are. But loyalty that erases self-respect is not noble. It is self-abandonment dressed as devotion. I had to examine why the idea of walking away from insufficient love felt so destabilizing. Part of it was pride. I did not want to admit that something I invested in was not sustaining me. Part of it was fear. Fear that better did not exist. Fear that midlife options were limited. And fear that asking for more would result in less. But beneath all of that was a deeper truth. I had not fully decided that I deserved love that felt steady, reciprocal, and grounded. Once that decision becomes internal, behavior follows. I stop explaining away patterns that hurt. I stop rationalizing inconsistency. I stop convincing myself that crumbs are a feast if I am grateful enough. Becoming the woman who does not beg is not about rejecting others. It is about refusing to negotiate with my own value. It means that if someone cannot meet me in clarity, I do not twist myself into ambiguity. If someone withdraws, I do not chase to restore equilibrium. If someone fails to see me, I do not increase performance. I let information be information. There is grief in this. A letting go of the habit of over-efforting feels like stepping into open space without a railing. I cannot control outcomes. I cannot guarantee connection. I cannot secure affection through strategy. But I also cannot betray myself in the process. There is a new steadiness in this posture. I am not hardened. I am simply less willing to abandon myself in pursuit of being chosen. If someone loves me, they will love the version of me that is clear, not the one that is constantly adjusting. If a relationship deepens, it will deepen because it is mutual, not because I engineered it through overfunctioning. The woman I am becoming does not beg because she does not need to, not because she is superior, not because she is unbreakable, but because she has finally aligned her behavior with her worth. She can desire love deeply. She can long for connection. She can hope, but she does not contort. She does not shrink. She does not barter pieces of herself for reassurance. She stands, not in defiance, in clarity. And clarity, I am discovering, is far more powerful than desperation ever was. The love that feels calm. For most of my life, I mistook intensity for love. If my heart raced, if I felt slightly off balance, if I was thinking about someone constantly, I interpreted that as depth. If there was drama, longing, or unpredictability, I told myself it meant passion. Calm, by contrast, felt suspicious. Calm felt like settling, like boredom, like the absence of spark. It took me years to understand that what I once called excitement was often anxiety wearing perfume. There is a very particular sensation in the body when love feels unstable. A quickening, a scanning, a subtle hyper-awareness of tone and timing. I used to live inside that current without questioning it. Did he text back quickly? Did his voice change? Is something off? I became attuned not only to connection but to its potential loss. That is not love. That is vigilance. The love that feels calm does not activate my nervous system in the same way. It does not demand constant interpretation. It does not require decoding. It does not rely on uncertainty to feel alive. At first, that kind of love felt almost unfamiliar. It felt quiet. There were no emotional spikes, no dramatic reconciliations, no roller coaster of closeness and distance, just steadiness. And I had to retrain myself to recognize that steadiness as desirable. Calm love does not mean the absence of feeling. It means the presence of safety. Safety in conversation. Safety in silence. Safety in disagreement. When I am loved in a calm way, I do not feel the need to perform. I do not measure my words to maintain favor. I do not shrink my ambition to avoid intimidating. I breathe differently. My shoulders drop. My jaw unclenches. My thoughts slow. This kind of love is not loud. It is consistent. Consistency used to feel unremarkable to me, predictable, ordinary. Now I see it as extraordinary. In a culture that glorifies intensity, where romance is often equated with chaos and longing, calm can feel anticlimactic. But calm is sustainable. When I think about the kind of love I want at this stage of my life, it is not fireworks. It is warmth. It is waking up on a Sunday morning in Chicago and knowing that I do not have to brace for emotional turbulence. It is being able to express disappointment without fearing abandonment. It is feeling desired without being evaluated. Calm love respects my autonomy. It does not crowd me. It does not consume me. It does not require me to dissolve into someone else's narrative. It stands beside me. I once believed that love needed to challenge me in dramatic ways, to keep me growing, that if it felt easy, it must be shallow. Now I see that growth can occur inside stability. In fact, stability often provides the foundation for deeper transformation. When I am not preoccupied with managing emotional unpredictability, I have energy to invest in myself, in my work, in my health, in my friendships, in creative pursuits. Calm love does not narrow my world, it expands it. There is also a calm love that exists independent of romantic partnership. The love I cultivate toward myself carries its own steadiness. When I speak to myself with respect, when I honor my boundaries, when I invest in my future, I create an internal climate that is less reactive. I do not spiral as quickly. I do not internalize minor disappointments as verdicts on my worth. I do not chase reassurance compulsively. This internal calm changes the relationships I tolerate. If someone's presence consistently unsettles me, if I feel anxious, hypervigilant, or diminished, I pay attention. Not with blame, not with drama, with clarity. I no longer confuse adrenaline with connection. There is something deeply adult about preferring calm. It suggests that I am no longer addicted to being destabilized, that I value peace not because I am avoiding life, but because I want to live it fully. A calm love allows space for depth without chaos. It allows disagreement without threat. It allows distance without panic. It allows individuality without fragmentation. When I think back to the years I waited, the years I tolerated emotional ambiguity because it felt exciting, I feel a mixture of tenderness and relief. Tenderness for the woman who equated intensity with significance. Relief that I no longer need that volatility to feel alive. Calm does not mean dull, it means grounded. Grounded in mutual respect, in shared values, in honest communication. There are moments now when I sit across from someone, whether it is a partner, a close friend, or even myself in quiet reflection, and feel a sense of ease that once would have seemed too simple to qualify as love. But simplicity can be profound. The love that feels calm does not announce itself dramatically. It reveals itself in patterns, in the way conflict resolves without lingering bitterness, in the way affection is offered without being extracted, in the way I am allowed to evolve without fear that growth will threaten connection. I am no longer interested in love that requires constant negotiation. I am interested in love that feels like home, not home as in complacency, home as in belonging, belonging to myself first, belonging to relationships that do not require me to contort. Calm love does not make my heart race, it makes it steady. And at this stage of my life, steadiness feels radical, because steadiness allows me to stop chasing. It allows me to inhabit. It allows me to trust. And perhaps most importantly, it allows me to love without losing myself in the process. Which you're not waiting anymore. There was a time when waiting felt normal, waiting for clarity, waiting for the right conversation, waiting for someone to notice the shift in me, waiting for life to slow down enough that I could finally step forward. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being wise. I told myself timing mattered, and sometimes it does. But there is a difference between patience and postponement. For years, I postponed myself. I postponed difficult conversations because I didn't want to disrupt stability. I postponed bold decisions because I didn't want to appear impulsive. I postponed desires because they didn't align neatly with the life I had already constructed. I became very skilled at managing the present. I became less skilled at claiming the future. Waiting gave me a sense of control. Oh, as long as I was waiting, I could imagine that something better might arrive without requiring me to risk anything. Waiting allowed hope without confrontation. But hope without action slowly turns into quiet resignation. The most subtle shift in my life did not come from a dramatic breakthrough. It came from a decision so small it almost seemed insignificant. I stopped waiting for permission. Permission to rest. Permission to speak honestly. Permission to want more depth. Permission to restructure relationships that no longer fit. I stopped waiting for someone else to validate what I already knew. There is something almost shocking about realizing that no one is coming to formally grant approval. No one stands at the edge of midlife and announces, "Now you may prioritize yourself. Now you may change. Now you may outgrow what once fit." If I wait for that announcement, I will wait indefinitely. So I began choosing, not recklessly, not dramatically, but consistently, choosing to have conversations that made my voice shake slightly, choosing to invest time in rooms that reflected who I am becoming, choosing to say no when yes would have been easier, choosing to articulate standards rather than hoping someone would guess them. The first few times felt uncomfortable. There is vulnerability in stepping forward without certainty. There is risk in declaring what I want when the outcome is not guaranteed. But something unexpected happened. I felt steadier, not because every choice led to immediate reward, but because I was no longer outsourcing my agency. When I stopped waiting, I stopped narrating my life as something happening to me. I began participating in it fully. There is grief in this transition. Letting go of waiting means letting go of fantasy. It means accepting that certain people may never show up in the ways I imagined, that certain seasons may not return, that certain dreams require me to move, not simply hope. But there is also relief. Relief in no longer scanning for rescue. Relief in knowing that even if I am misunderstood, I am not invisible to myself. I used to believe that being chosen was the ultimate validation. Now I understand that choosing myself changes the entire equation. When I choose myself, I treat my time as valuable. I treat my body as worthy of care. I treat my mind as deserving of protection. I treat my desires as legitimate. That internal alignment alters how I show up in every relationship. I am not negotiating from scarcity. I'm not auditioning for approval. I'm not performing composure to maintain connection. I am present. Waiting kept me suspended between who I was and who I might become. Choosing moves me forward, not in leaps, in increments. A boundary expressed, a new environment entered, a conversation initiated, a pattern discontinued. Each decision reinforces a quiet truth. I am not at the mercy of my circumstances. Midlife is often described as a crossroads, but it feels more like a narrowing. The margin for postponement shrinks. The illusion of endless time fades. The cost of inaction becomes clearer. This is not frightening. It is clarifying. I no longer want to look back and see decades of careful accommodation without authentic expansion. I no longer want to explain my own dissatisfaction away. And I no longer want to sit on the couch in Chicago at night, staring at a silent phone, believing that fulfillment depends on someone else's initiative. I am not waiting anymore, not for the perfect relationship, not for the perfect moment, not for universal approval. I am participating. I am shaping. I am responding to my own life with intention instead of hesitation. That does not mean everything is resolved. There are still questions, still uncertainties, still seasons of doubt. But doubt no longer paralyzes me. It informs me. I can move while uncertain. I can act without absolute guarantees. And perhaps that is the deepest shift of all. I once believed that clarity had to precede action. Now I understand that clarity often follows it. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself in these patterns, the quiet ache, on the over-functioning, the waiting, I want you to sit with one simple reflection. Where in your life are you still waiting? Not dramatically, subtly. Are you waiting for someone to change before you speak? Or are you ready to express what you need regardless of their response? Here's a small question for you. When you think about the love you crave most right now, is it A, someone finally choosing you more intentionally, or B, you choosing yourself more consistently? Comment A or B below. There is no right answer, only honesty. And if you feel comfortable, share why. Your insight might be the mirror another woman needs. What are your thoughts? What part of this journey resonates with you the most? What feels challenging? I read the comments carefully, and this space becomes richer when we speak openly. If this conversation feels like something you've been carrying quietly for years, subscribe to the channel, not for noise, not for quick fixes, but for depth, for steady reflection, for the kind of dialogue that honors where we actually are. Because you're not broken, you're just in the middle.